Well, I hope you guys like those photos. So as you can see here, today we're going to be talking about long exposure photography. And what that is, it's a very creative branch of photography where you're playing with the exposure time, or your shutter speed, if you will, of your camera. And so in order to do that, you'll need a couple things. And so I'm going to talk about that here. And so in today's tutorial for 5 Minute Friday, we're going to talk about how to do long exposure while working with water in the photo. First of all, since we're going to be working with long exposure, you'll need something called an ND, or a variable ND filter. Really what that means is it's essentially a filter that goes on top of your lens, and depending on how you rotate it or how dark the filter is, it'll allow you to essentially expose for a longer time. So for example, if I have a camera and I set my shutter speed to be, let's say, 10 seconds long, in most cases for very wide aperture lenses like this one, which is a 2.8, you'll let too much light in. So even if you stop down to, so let's say, later down to, let's say, anything between 9 to f16, you'll still get a lot of light for that exposure time. And so what you want is actually a filter. The filter will essentially start to block out a lot of the light. And because it's blocking a lot of light, you'll be capturing for a longer time. And so when movement comes into the frame, like water in this case, it'll look like almost a ghostly apparition, or a lot of movement comes in. And what it does on the camera is it's going to average out a lot of that images into one image. So if you have 10 seconds, what it's doing is it's collecting mini shots for that 10 seconds, and then it's going to average it out throughout the camera internally. And what that does is it's going to create creamy or smoother images like the ones you saw in the intro. In order to do that, let's cover a couple basics. So what you'll need is, you'll definitely need an ND filter. You'll also need a really good tripod. The sturdier the better. And you'll need, the last thing, you'll need either a, I would say, intervalometer, or have the timer set on your camera. And the reason you want that is because you're going to be exposing and having a self timer to avoid a lot of the shake. And anytime you shake the image, it will affect, or I mean, you shake the camera, it will affect the image. So you want to avoid that. And so the other helpful thing about these NDs is actually when I go shoot video outside. And here in Arizona in the summertime, it gets really bright. And what happens is you overexpose the video, and you want to try to avoid that, because then when you try to edit it, it's just going to be a mess of colors, and you don't want to do that. So that's why I actually use a lot of these filters, or ND filters, on my camera. That way I could change how much light I'm actually going to be exposing to. So I'll show you later in the video when we get to the park how I do that. So let's get going. So let's grab your camera, your favorite lens, a variable ND filter, as well as your tripod and intervalometer. Let's head to the park and show you how I do these photos, okay? All right, let's get going. See you there. Okay, I hope you guys can see it. So I wanted to showcase what an ND filter is useful for video. So this is kind of the first thing I usually try to do when I'm gonna be shooting outside. Try to get one of these, and as you can see, you can make it darker or lighter depending on how much of the variable ND you use. So in this case, we're just gonna go a little bit, give myself just a little bit of contrast. Let me see if I can adjust the... I'm over here gonna be shooting a very simple shot using two things. On my camera, I'll show you guys. Okay, I don't know if you guys could see that, but here on my camera, I have my little setup. I have my variable ND, and it's a 10-stop variable ND. Focus, there we go. And what I'm gonna do is use this to try to get a nice scene of the tree through the water. Okay, so let's talk about the settings. So what you'll wanna do is set your camera to first to be in manual. Once you have it in manual, what you want to do is start focusing the distance of where you want your shot to be mainly focused on. The reason for that is because you're going to be shooting at a very specific exposure length. So in this case, you'll have to start playing around depending on the strength of your ND filter. You may have to go stronger. So if in this case, if you have, let's say, a 2-stop ND filter or a neutral density filter, you'll have to have probably something between 5 seconds to 10 seconds of exposure. If you have something stronger like I do, I have a 10-stop filter, so I'm gonna have to be in the range of, let's say, somewhere between 20 to 45 seconds. So what you want to do is, again, bracket the focus where you're going to be aiming and focusing your image at. Once you do, set that to manual, make sure that the manual is completely off, and then go and screw on or place your ND filter on. And from there, if you have an intervalometer or a timer on your camera, set that to 10 to 20 seconds. That way it stabilizes the tripod from there. And once it's stable, you'll want to shoot. And I typically do 2 or 3 photos. That way I could do a stacked image from there, because the focus sometimes moves a little bit. But once you have that, that longer exposure time will allow you to kind of get that creamy effect when you do, your photos and whatnot. So, and then once I have a good idea of what the exposure time is, another factor that you can play around with is actually the focal plane of distance, or in this case, your stop, your f-stop. So in most cameras, this is a 24 to 70 2.8. The f-stop, the furthest f-stop I could go down to is 2.8. I want to take that down to, let's say, the sharpest place of your lens. In some cases it's 9, it's f9 to, I wouldn't go any past f16. And so what I would do is I would stop that down, and right now I have it at f11. So again, once I played around with how much exposure I want to get a few more less glimpses of light, what you could do is, again, stop down from that. So let me take this shot, and then we'll head back to the office and show you how the results are. Look at a couple of these right here. So this first image right here, they all have essentially the same settings. The only difference that you'll notice is that one of them essentially has a slightly longer or shorter shutter speed than the rest, and one has a fairly long one, and one seems to be in about the middle. So this right here is a perfect example of what happens when you expose using your shutter speed for too long of a time. And it's not usually a problem when you overexpose. The issue is trying to recover a lot of the detail in the background. When you overexpose means that your shutter just gets a lot of hot pixels, and you're just gonna end up with kind of a muddy white image. So even if I do a little bit of adjusting here on this image, I don't think it will, yeah, there's no way I could recover much detail with this one. So even if I do any adjusting, it doesn't look like I'm gonna get much out of this. Yeah, even if I bring the exposure down, yeah, as you can see, it's starting to clip. If we bring down the highlights all the way down, still not much detail that you're going to bring out of it. So this one, unfortunately, is done for. But let's actually go over an image that seems to be underexposed. So this one may have been underexposed and not had enough light in. So if we actually do a little bit of autocorrect on this, you could actually see, even though it was underexposed, we could still recover quite a bit of the detail. So if we actually just bring up the exposure a little bit, we still see quite a bit of the detail in the background. So this is actually ideally what you want. You want to expose, but still be underexposed where it won't be creating just a hot pixel of the image like this one. But if we go to this one right here, we can actually do a little bit of adjusting. And as we could see, this one's revealing quite a bit of the detail in the background. So let's actually just do a quick little straightening here. That's good. I probably would crop in a little bit here. See if I could get rid of these people here. That's good. Let's straighten it a little bit more. Yeah, that's better. And so, as you can see, because we're exposing for a fairly long time, there was a little bit of wind here, and it got rid of a lot. It made these leaves appear essentially, and it's going to get rid of a lot of the ripples naturally. But if you could glance over at the very long exposed image, if we do a similar crop, let's get rid of these people here. That's good, and let's straighten this out real quick. See that? As you can see, because it's a longer exposure here, the water is actually clearer and creamier, and that's ideally what you want with long exposure. You want something where if there's a lot of running water, it makes it disappear the longer you expose. So the way that I made this appear, or extended the exposure really, was actually I stepped down from the I think it was 11 here. I stepped down to F14 and then just gave it a few more seconds of exposure. So this one overall was 30 seconds, F14, fairly sharp, widest that the lens could be, and just let it expose. And again, I tried not to let the tripod move, use my shutter release, and use the VND filter almost to the point where it was as dark as it could. And before then, make sure that your focus is on point. The focusing point for this one was actually back here near the mountains at the edge of the water, and it was as sharp as it could get. And as you can see, I'm pretty satisfied with this. Let me actually let me see if I could get a little bit less detail here. Yeah, I think I would. I'd probably hop on Photoshop and get rid of this a little bit right here. Probably leave this streak here of line, because this right here was probably a rock or something. But it'll actually show the effect of the river. But overall, I really like this one. I highly suggest, if no one's gotten a neutral density filter or a variable ND filter, just try it out, expose different lengths of time, and play around with the limitations of how far you could push the lens with the filter on and off, and just get a feel for it. And essentially, you'll be able to create a lot of interesting exposures like this. In the next video, I might play around with my new light that I got and just kind of show you to play around with long exposures, but actually at nighttime, to kind of create some creative light painting, if you will. So in the meantime, hope you guys like this video. More videos like this coming your way, and until next time, stay tuned for another 5 Minute Friday. Later.